Welcome, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're taking a journey into the heart of the Maya world.
It's a fascinating world.
We're talking about those incredible Maya kingdoms,
Right.
their rulers, and those amazing systems they used to record their history. The glyphs, calendars, the whole works. We've got some seriously cool sources to work with, too. Academic texts and visuals that just blow you away.
Like jade carvings.
Exactly. Jade carvings, towering stelae, and glyphs telling epic tales. It's like stepping right back into their world.
And we can't forget that Maya calendar.
Oh, absolutely. We're even going to try and crack that code. And to help us navigate this historical maze, we've got a true expert with us today, someone who can connect the dots like no other. So get ready to explore a world of Maya kingdoms. And remember, this wasn't a simple empire like the Aztecs or Incas. It's way more intricate.
Yeah, it was. Think more like a map with over 60 independent kingdoms.
Wow, over 60.
Yeah, and each one vying for dominance.
That's a lot of kingdoms jostling for power.
It was. It's crucial to remember the Maya civilization was never a unified entity.
So not a single emperor ruling over it all.
No. Instead, picture a constantly shifting landscape, alliances, rivalries, power struggles, all between these kingdoms.
Dominance. That's the word that jumps out at me. What did that look like in practice? Were they always at each other's throats?
Well, warfare was definitely a part of it,
Of course.
but it wasn't always about complete conquest.
Huh.
This concept of overkingship played a big role. Think powerful rulers.
Okay.
Through strategic wins and controlling key resources, they could build up networks of influence over their weaker neighbors.
To like a web of power with some kingdoms pulling the strings more than others?
Yeah, exactly. It was a real challenge to stay on top in that kind of environment.
I can imagine if I were a ruler back then, I'd constantly be looking over my shoulder.
You'd need a serious sense of strategy to survive. Alliances shifted constantly, new challengers popping up all the time. It was dynamic, volatile, the whole deal.
Speaking of rulers, our sources call them holy lords, Kuhulaja. That sounds seriously impressive. What set these rulers apart? Was it just about military might?
Well, military prowess was definitely important,
Makes sense.
but Maya kingship was deeply tied to their beliefs, their religion. They weren't just political leaders, they were seen as divine intermediaries, chosen by the gods to lead.
So it wasn't enough to be a strong warrior, you had to have the gods on your side too.
Exactly. And this divine right to rule, it wasn't just about who was the strongest.
So it wasn't like a free-for-all brawl for the throne,
No, royal lineages were key. They believed the right to rule was inherited.
passed down through the family.
Exactly, from father to son. And the sources describe some pretty elaborate rituals associated with all this.
Rituals?
Yeah.
Like what? Tell me more.
Okay, picture this. Bloodletting ceremonies. Rulers offered their own blood to the gods. They also donned these special regalia, headdresses, with jade, feathers, symbolizing their sacred authority. These rituals weren't just symbolic gestures. They reinforced this idea that the king's power came from a higher source.
A visual reminder of their divine mandate.
All right. And speaking of power moves, some kings even incorporated the names of their war captives into their own names.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that. Talk about a bold
Yeah.
statement. It's like saying, I conquered you so thoroughly, I'm taking your identity too.
It emphasizes how important warfare was in Maya society. Victory wasn't just about land, it was about proving your right to rule, acquiring captives, cementing your position in that whole web of kingdoms we were talking about earlier.
High stakes indeed. It really makes you appreciate the power dynamics at play. But it also leads us to this amazing way they documented it all, their hieroglyphic writing. Those images in our sources are incredible.
They are.
Like this intricate Chaktak headdress. It's a work of art in itself. But how do these symbols tell us about their history?
Well, the Maya writing system, it's both complex and artistic. They used a mix of phonetic sounds and logograms.
Oh, gograms.
Yes, symbols that represent whole words or concepts. Think of it like a visual puzzle, each symbol with layers of meaning.
Deciphering those glyphs must have been like cracking a secret code. How did scholars even begin to understand them?
It was a massive undertaking. Still is, actually. But think about researchers like Tatiana Proskouriakov.
I heard of her.
She meticulously analyzed patterns in the glyphs. Her work was revolutionary. It proved these weren't just abstract symbols, they were historical records, accounts of real events and people.
That's incredible. So through their work, we can piece together dynasties, wars, even get a sense of individual rulers. It's like a window into their world.
Exactly. Deciphering the Maya hieroglyphs has transformed how we understand their civilization. It's like we're reading their history directly from their own voices. And, speaking of voices, their whole concept of time was so different from ours. Our sources describe this really intricate calendar system with a 260-day Tzolk'in and a 365-day Hab, interwoven like a complex calendar round.
2 calendars. That's wild. It almost sounds like they were obsessed with time, right? Was it just about scheduling, or was there something deeper going on there?
It went way beyond just keeping track of appointments. For the Maya, time wasn't linear like we see it. It was cyclical.
So not a straight line, but more like a circle.
Exactly. They saw it as a wheel constantly turning, with cycles of creation and destruction repeating eternally.
Whoa. So instead of a straight line from past to future, it's a circle. That's mind-blowing. How did that even work in practice?
Well, think of it this way. The Tzolk'in was primarily for religious purposes, divination, rituals, that sort of thing.
Okay, a calendar for the gods. Got it.
Right. And then the Hab, that was tied to the solar year and agricultural cycles.
The calendar for the crops, too. Makes sense. But our source material also mentions this thing called the long count, right? What was that all about?
Ah, the long count. That was their system for tracking really long periods. Imagine looking back thousands of years. They could pinpoint specific dates with this. They even had a creation date the moment they believed the current universe began,
When was that?
according to their calculations. 3114 BC.
Wow. I mean, thinking about that cyclical view of time,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder, right? How did that impact their decisions? If you believe history just repeats itself, does it make you more likely to take risks or less?
Yeah.
It's fascinating to think about.
It really is. Their calendar wasn't just a tool. It reflected their whole worldview, their understanding of the cosmos and their place in it.
Okay, so we've got this world of competing kingdoms, divine rulers, these intricate systems for recording history and understanding time. To really bring it all to life, let's zoom in on 2 specific kingdoms, Tikal and Calakmul. Our sources paint them as arch rivals. They were locked in this struggle for supremacy. What made these 2 so important?
Tikal and Calakmul, they were more than just powerful. They represented 2 different paths to power. Think of Tikal as the more traditional power, strong kingship, religious authority.
And Calakmul.
Calakmul, they were all about strategy, alliances, shaking things up, challenging the status quo.
So not just armies clashing, but ideologies too. That makes their rivalry even more intense. What were some of the defining moments, the key players in this epic saga?
Well, let's start with Tikal. Our sources point to rulers like Yaxnun Ayin I. He came to power in the late 4th century AD, credited with leading Tikal into a golden age, expanding their reach, building impressive monuments. There's even evidence of contact with Teotihuacan during his reign.
Wait, Teotihuacan, that massive city in central Mexico?
Yeah.
So Tikal was playing on a bigger stage than just the Maya region. They were making connections further afield. That's ambitious. What about this guy, Siaj Chankawil II?
He ruled Tikal about a century after Yaxnun Ayin I. He was a master of, symbolism in politics. You see these monuments depicting him with this headdress. It blends Maya and Teotihuacan imagery.
A fashion statement with political implications.
Exactly. It's like he was intentionally connecting Tikal to both traditions, solidifying their power, their prestige.
Smart move. He was weaving a tapestry of power, drawing on different sources of authority. What about Calakmul? Who are their heavy hitters?
Calakmul was ruled by this dynasty called the Snake Kings, a force to be reckoned with. Their emblem, a snake head, and you see it all over the Maya world. A symbol of their reach, their ambition. They were masters of strategy, forming alliances, often with kingdoms that were traditionally Tikal's rivals.
It sounds like they were playing the long game, undermining Tikal's power base bit by bit. Did they ever pull off a major victory?
Oh, yeah. In 562 AD, they did. Calakmul, led by this king called Sky Witness, crushed Tikal in battle.
Wow. Talk about a turning point. That must have shifted the balance of power big time.
It did. Put Calakmul firmly in control for a while.
But did Tikal ever recover?
Eventually, yes. But the rivalry went on for centuries. Each kingdom had its moments of dominance and decline. One particularly interesting episode involves this Calakmul ruler, Utnum the Great, late 7th century AD. He was brilliant, strategic, and ruthless. He knew that to really weaken Tikal, he had to isolate them, diplomatically.
So not just brute force, he was playing the political game too.
Exactly. He worked hard to forge alliances with Tikal's former allies, turning the tables on them. He was also a master of, you could call it propaganda. using monuments and inscriptions to celebrate his wins, presenting Calakmul as the real power in the Maya world.
It's like he was rewriting history as he went along. Did his plan work?
It did. He isolated Tikal, orchestrated these military victories that really weakened their position. His reign, a high point for Calakmul. They controlled a vast region, solidified their influence.
So both Tikal and Calakmul, they had their moments in the sun. But their story really shows how power can shift so quickly. One minute you're on top, the next you're fighting to stay afloat. Must have been exhausting.
Yeah, ruling a Maya kingdom back then, no walk in the park. You had to be a diplomat, a politician, a military leader, a master of symbolism, all at once.
And even then, no guarantees. It makes you realize the challenges these rulers faced. But, in all this talk of kings and conquest, what about the queens? Were they just silent figures in all this? Or did they wield some power too? I mean, it's easy to focus on the kings and the battles, but what about the queens? Were they just sort of background figures in this whole power struggle?
Oh, not at all. Our sources show that women, especially those from elite families, they held a lot of power, they had influence, they took part in these important rituals, advised their husbands, their sons on political matters, and in some cases even ruled in their own right.
So they weren't just stuck in the palace. Our sources mention some pretty powerful figures like the Lady of Tikal and Lady Sixkai of Naranjo. What do we know about these women?
The Lady of Tikal, she's fascinating, a bit of a mystery too. She's shown on monuments, performing rituals, holding these symbols of authority. It tells us she had a prominent role in Tikal's political and religious life.
So she had real influence.
Definitely. Her exact relationship to the ruling king is still being debated, but her influence is clear.
It's like she's challenging our assumptions about women's roles back then. It's amazing. And Lady Sixkai, that name just screams warrior queen.
She was. She ruled Naranjo during a really chaotic period, and those monuments show her leading armies into battle, vanquishing enemies. Her reign, it's solid proof that women could and did hold the highest positions of power in the Maya world.
It's incredible how they broke those traditional molds. Really changes how we think about gender roles in ancient societies.
It does. Reminds us that history is full of surprises, right? Our understanding of the past is always changing as we uncover more evidence.
Always more to discover, more perspectives to consider. I mean, we've only scratched the surface of this civilization today.
Yeah. We've looked at their complex politics, the divine right of their rulers, those incredible systems they built to record history and understand time. But one thing that really sticks with me, it's that cyclical view of time embedded in their calendar.
Yeah.
If they believe that history just repeats itself, what does that tell us about how they saw the world?
That's a great question. Did they feel like they had more control over their lives or less? If they thought they were just living through some predetermined cycle, makes you wonder how they approach things like warfare or even just daily life.
For sure. It shows how important it is to look beyond the surface, try to understand the beliefs, the worldviews that shaped these civilizations.
Well said. And I think we've given everyone a pretty good look at the Maya world today, from their power struggles, their amazing rulers, to that sophisticated understanding of time and the universe.
We've just started to uncover their secrets, but hopefully we've piqued some interest, inspired people to keep exploring.
Absolutely. And if you want to dive even deeper, we highly recommend Chronicle of the Maya Kings and Queens. It's packed with details and visuals.
Great book.
You can find a link to a PDF version on Rafi's Linktree. It's in the show notes. That's linktr.ee/toxexinages.
An amazing resource for anyone fascinated by the Maya.
So huge thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into Maya civilization. Until next time, keep exploring and keep those fascinating questions coming.